Lucas Vargas Tira was born on October 19, 1986, in Bahia, Brazil. He was the third child of José Carlos Tira and Marian. His older brothers, Carlos Jr. and Carlos Felipe, welcomed the new family member with open arms. José Carlos was a business administrator born in Rio Grande do Sul. Due to his work, he traveled constantly, which made him miss his family. In 1989, Marian decided to move permanently to the capital of Bahia with José Carlos and their children. Later, they lived in Rio de Janeiro. José Carlos and Marian were people of great faith and raised their children with those values. Lucas learned from a young age that things should be shared with everyone. He took special pleasure in helping others and caring for them. As he grew up, he further demonstrated this inherent vocation for service. According to those close to him, his faith was paramount. He repudiated lies and anything that strayed from the truth. The Word of God deeply influenced him, and his behavior was marked by transparency. Despite his small size, he could transform sadness into joy and smiles. He expressed himself as someone who knew everything and felt entitled to give his opinion on any subject because he placed the Eternal Father above all else. He was a boy convinced of his faith and read the Bible every day. Whenever he saw people on the streets while out walking with his mother, Lucas would say that he wanted to be a doctor when he grew up to help heal people. His desire to become a doctor coexisted with his wish to grow within the church and eventually hold a position as a bishop. In June 2000, at 13 years old, while studying at a school in the Copacabana neighborhood, his mother was called by the school directors about an incident involving Lucas and two other children who accused him of something unpleasant. In the boardroom, Marian, Lucas, the director, and the two accusing boys gathered together. While his mother defended him, Lucas remained silent, attentive to everything said with the calm and serenity of an innocent. At a certain point in the meeting, the director, frustrated by Lucas's attitude, urged him to defend himself. The boy's response was surprising. He looked sternly at them and said, "The righteous do not justify themselves." After saying this, he remained silent and was exonerated of the accusations. Lucas's life changed at the beginning of 2001 when his family made plans to move to Italy for work. Marian was the first to leave because she got a job in a steakhouse run by her sister in Parma, 465 kilometers from Rome, the Italian capital. She had to travel soon because the job needed her immediately. However, her husband and children had a strong attachment to Brazil and wanted to spend more time in their native country to say goodbye to their friends. They also wanted to visit Salvador, where all their family ties were. For that reason, they agreed that José Carlos and the two youngest children would embark for Italy after the European winter. However, the plans changed drastically. On January 5th of that year, José Carlos and the two younger boys left Rio de Janeiro for Salvador, even though 14-year-old Lucas was not very happy about the trip, as he had many friends in Rio. Obedient son, he accepted his parents' decision. After traveling 1,700 kilometers on a road trip, Lucas, his father, and his brother Felipe arrived in Salvador. There, they stayed at Hira's house, a brother of José Carlos, and his wife, Dilsa, who had 5 adorable children, Mose, Sarah, Raquel, Gabriela, and Israel. From that moment, Lucas began to attend the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God in the neighborhood of Santa Cruz, since he did not want to be far from his religion and his activities in the temple. He volunteered for tasks ranging from the easiest to the most difficult. Due to his great charisma, he attracted people and demonstrated with his actions that he was a born leader. Everything seemed to be well organized in the church. The group of young people was large, and to facilitate the tasks, teams were created. The boys were divided into 12 groups called tribes, each with a chief who was called a tribal leader. Lucas had many duties. Among them was to attract as many young people as possible to join the church. Shortly after, Lucas was allowed to lead one of the tribes. Enthusiastic about gaining more followers for his faith, he worked with great care and managed to maintain his tribe with constant growth. His efforts bore fruit, and his tribe became the one with the largest number of followers. As encouragement for his good work, he received several prizes, such as a box of chocolates, which he shared with the members of his group. Due to his great qualities, he was assigned a new position as a worker, whose function was to assist the pastor during religious services and take care of the routine within the church. To assign him this new role, all the members of the temple needed to agree. And so it happened. One of those who was most pleased with Lucas's appointment as a worker was the auxiliary pastor Silvio Roberto Galizzo, 21 years old, who had the nickname the Secretary. He had been transferred from another congregation due to problems that were never clarified or made public. The only explanation given was that Pastor Silvio had behaved inappropriately every day. He became closer to Lucas with the excuse that the boy had so many future ambitions and that being close to him would help him learn more about everything concerning the functions within the church. Practically, the man monopolized all of the teenager's time. Over time, Silvio's inappropriate behavior, for which he had been transferred, began to become evident. He became possessive and did not want Lucas to get close to anyone. He wanted all the boy's attention and controlled his steps. The religious attitude generated some concern. But when they asked him the reason for so much concern about having Lucas always within reach, the pastor responded that he needed to have him close due to the teachings he was transferring to him. Thus, he managed to get the boy to accompany him more than his own shadow. At the beginning of February of that year, 2001, Lucas began to become romantically interested in a 17-year-old girl who also worked as a worker in his church. Although she was a little older than him, she was his first love. As soon as he found out about the relationship, Silvio forbade her approaching him. That girl and any other made his feelings of jealousy and possession more than clear. At the end of the same month, Lucas and another young man, whose identity was not revealed, stayed late into the night resolving some administrative matters with Pastor Silvio in the temple. Under the false concern that it might be too dangerous for them to return home, the man suggested that they spend the night there. The parents were informed, and it was fine with them. They considered the church to be the safest place after their homes. While the other teenager stayed asleep on a church pew with only a pillow, Silvio invited Lucas to sleep in his room and his bed. It was not known if the boy was disturbed that night, but the situation alone was enough to cause an uproar among the members of the congregation. The incident was referred to the superiors. To avoid scandals and close the matter, the religious authorities decided again to transfer Silvio to the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God in the Rio Bayo neighborhood. The only thing they were interested in was avoiding unnecessary repercussions that could tarnish the image of the temple. Lucas's father, for his part, never found out what happened. However, Pastor Silvio, bordering on impudence, continued to attend church services despite having been transferred, arguing that no one could stop him from entering the place as a simple faithful. It was obvious that his only interest was to watch over Lucas, for whom he already had a total obsession. On March 21st, Lucas woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning. As always, he was very excited and happy. He brushed his teeth, put on cologne, and dressed in a long-sleeved white shirt, blue dress pants, a black belt, black socks, and shoes. At 6:30, he left the house smiling and told his father that he would return at 1 o'clock in the afternoon to have lunch. Punctually at the scheduled time, Lucas arrived at the family residence to eat and talk about his activities. He had a quick lunch and said he needed to go to the temple in the Pituba neighborhood. He left and returned home at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, changed his shirt, hugged his father, and left half an hour later. At the temple, he attended a youth meeting as usual. That night, he was happy to be with his group and to be able to help many kids find a new path away from drugs, marginality, crimes, or sadness. At the end of the activities, at approximately 9 o'clock at night, Lucas was on the outskirts of the religious complex, talking with some friends and his girlfriend when he was called by Silvio. The always helpful and obedient teenager never dared to object, much less disobeyed the order of a superior. He said goodbye to everyone and left with the man, who invited him to a prayer evening that was taking place in the church. The deadline for Lucas to be home was 9:30 at night. On the few occasions when he was forced to stay out late, he always called his father to inform him where he was. Because of this, his father began to worry, since more than 20 minutes had passed after the scheduled time and the boy had neither arrived nor called. The man changed his clothes, and when he was ready to go out to look for him, the phone rang. It was after 10 o'clock at night. On the other side of the line, Lucas's voice was heard, telling him that he was with Pastor Silvio for a prayer purpose. Carlos calmed down again, thinking that the church was the safest place for his son to be, apart from home, but he was very wrong. The first thing the next morning, he was worried because Lucas had not arrived. The father went to look for him. First, he passed by the church where the teenager attended, but they told him that Pastor Silvio had taken him to the temple in the Rio Belmo neighborhood. When he went to the place, Silvio told him that the boy was not there. He stated that he had left him at night at the bus stop in the Valjaro Ross neighborhood and gave him money to go to the church of Pituba. Lucas's father complained to him for having taken the teenager there without his authorization. When the distraught man arrived at the place and asked Fernando de Silva, who was the pastor in charge of the region, where his son was, he replied that he did not know and that he had not seen him the night before. José Carlos questioned him because he was responsible for taking care of the young people. However, due to the lack of response from the religious man, he left upset and walked aimlessly with a photo of his son in his hand, asking if anyone had seen him, but there was no sign of him. The man returned to the temple of Santa Cruz, where he remained sitting in front until the end of the afternoon in the hope that the minor would appear. At 6 o'clock in the afternoon, several of the man's friends and his other son, Felipe, arrived to see if Lucas had appeared. But the boy seemed to have been swallowed by the earth. The father got into his car and, in the company of friends and family, went to report the disappearance at the police station. However, the police officers on duty said they had to wait 48 hours to file the report. In those days, there was no immediate search law. José Carlos left the police station irritated and went to visit the city's hospitals. The task lasted until after 3 o'clock in the morning, but Lucas still did not appear. Eager to find even the slightest trace of his son to bring him back home, José Carlos returned to the church, where he stayed until the next morning. At 5:30 in the morning, he met his son's best friend, and they went to talk to Silvio again. This time, the religious man's version was different from the one given the day before. He told José Carlos that he had left his son in the Chapada del Rio Royo neighborhood. José Carlos accused him of lying and was sure that something bad had happened to Lucas. He later said that he felt like hitting the pastor but restrained himself and returned to the church where Lucas attended. He made posters with his son's photo at a printing press and began to stick them everywhere, determined to find him. While he was doing that, his phone rang. The call was from a temple worker stating that the police had found a burned body in a vacant lot on the avenue next to the church where Silvio worked. Carlos found the call strange because no one other than his son had his cell phone number, and he did not know the supposed employee who called. Despite that, he went to the indicated place accompanied by the owner of the printing press. When they arrived, the owner told him to stay in the car and that he would go to see if the information was true. After a few minutes, he returned and told him that there was a body, but it did not look like Lucas. In reality, the man did not dare to tell him the truth. 3 police officers arrived at the site at 11:30 at night. 2 alleged witnesses told the officers that they had seen a fire and then saw several men fleeing at high speed. The body found was inside a box on Vasco da Gama Avenue and completely burned. Even with the hope that his son was alive, José Carlos returned to the printing press to search for more posters. After another night of insomnia, on the morning of March 24th, he continued walking through the streets looking for Lucas. With no results, he went to the Universal Cathedral to speak with the person in charge, but they told him that he was not there. He remained there for 9 hours, waiting for someone to attend to him and give him an explanation, but this did not happen, and he left the place disgusted. The father suspected that everyone was involved in the strange disappearance of his son, and that is why they appeared cold and indifferent to his anguish and despair. On Sunday, March 25th, José Carlos went to the temple again, accompanied by his son's girlfriend. There, he found armed security guards who prevented him from approaching Bishop Paulo Rodriguez. He went down with the girl to the basement of the religious complex, where Silvio was also protected by several representatives of the clergy. José Carlos again asked him about the boy, but Silvio refused to answer. Instead, the bishop called José Carlos a liar and ordered him to leave the room. The father continued his fight to find Lucas for some time. He was subjected to terrible humiliation, mainly by representatives of the Universal Church, who gave false clues about the child's whereabouts and even complained to him when he spoke to the media. He received dozens of anonymous calls telling him that they had seen Lucas, but none of them were real. The following days were filled with total desperation. José Carlos walked from street to street, knocking on doors, accompanied by his son's friends. He went on television programs, where he showed Lucas's photo and asked the population of Salvador for help to find him. Day and night, he continued through the streets and alleys, posting posters with the teenager's photograph. He continued visiting health centers in the city, and even though his strength was at the limit, he persisted in the search. The incessant search for his son ended after 12 days when he received a call from his son Felipe, who told him that the charred body found days ago was that of Lucas. Felipe recognized his brother by a lock of hair that had remained intact and by the remains of his pants, shirt, underwear, and the double belt buckle Lucas was wearing the last time he was seen alive. Although the authorities still needed the results of DNA tests to confirm the victim's identity, the family was convinced it was Lucas. Upon receiving the news, Jose Carlos felt his heart accelerate, then he ran out of air. He did not understand why or who had reasons to be so cruel to his son, as Lucas was loved by everyone. The body burned at the Legal Medical Institute was all that was left for his family. Jose Carlos went home in the midst of an emotional upheaval. He was desperate, anguished, and anesthetized by pain. He struggled to accept the terrible reality. The most difficult task was to tell Moran, Lucas's mother, that her son had died. Upon learning what had happened, Moran traveled from Italy to Brazil, accompanied by her sister Marilia. Her husband did not dare to go to the airport to pick them up because he felt responsible for the boy's death. Lucas's older brothers, Felipe and Carlos, went to pick up their mother, who was crying inconsolably. Moran said that losing her parents was losing the past, but losing a child was losing the future. On April 4th, Jose Carlos went to the police station to give his statements against Pastor Silvio. Some of Lucas's friends also testified, confirming the religious man's inappropriate behavior with the boy and that Lucas had gone with the pastor the day he disappeared. Silvio was interrogated but denied all the accusations and provided contradictory versions about the last time he saw Lucas. Despite everything, the police refused to arrest him, and the pastor left the station calmly, smiling and mocking everyone. The crime shook the city, and within a few days, the news dominated 80% of the television coverage. The body remained in the morgue for 43 days until the DNA test, which took a long time, confirmed it was indeed Lucas. The forensic report revealed terrible details. First, there was an attempt at asphyxiation that did not work, evidenced by the fact that he had a piece of cloth in his mouth. It was later learned that he was burned alive, so charred that it was impossible to determine the exact cause of death or whether there was sexual abuse. Still shaken by the cruel details of his death, after completing all the legal processes, the parents received the body almost 2 months after the crime. They were able to give Lucas a Christian burial. The funeral was attended by family, friends, and people who loved Lucas. Numerous posters and banners with Lucas's photo remain scattered throughout Salvador, a testament to his father's struggle. Lucas was buried in the Bosadís cemetery. The case was investigated by the civil police, and expert reports determined that Lucas was gagged, and his hands were tied with a piece of curtain fabric similar to one found in the church of Rio Bella, making Pastor Silvio the main suspect in the homicide. The prosecutor's office suspected that Lucas had been a victim of rape. However, at the time, the technical police department did not detect sexual violence in the forensic analysis. In October 2001, the police investigation into the murder was concluded, and Silvio was identified as the perpetrator. Although the prosecutors requested his preventive detention, the judge did not consider it necessary, and the man continued the process in freedom. The measure adopted by the court, which already demonstrated the preferential treatment that the accused received, forced Jose Carlos to camp in front of the public ministry to demand justice. The family had to resort for months to organizations guaranteeing human rights, the Ministry of Justice, and even the United Nations in Switzerland to ensure that Lucas's murder would not go unpunished. Jose Carlos questioned the delay in the trial and also demanded an investigation into the sources of Pastor Silvio's financial resources, as he was defended by one of the most expensive lawyers in Brazil. After 3 consecutive years of fighting and hundreds of protests, in June 2004, the trial of Pastor Silvio was scheduled. According to the established facts, although the reasons were not completely clarified, the pastor repeatedly abused Lucas that night inside the Universal Church and then dragged him to an internal courtyard where he set him on fire while he was still alive. The court considered the crime a qualified triple homicide and accepted the public prosecutor's thesis that indicated he committed rape and then killed the teenager for passionate reasons. The main evidence in deciding the sentence were testimonies provided by 5 young friends of Lucas and members of the It should be noted that for telling the truth before the law, the boys were threatened by the ecclesiastical authorities and expelled from the temple. Even though the accused denied the murder, and it was not possible to determine the exact motive or trigger for the crime, the jury decided there was sufficient evidence against him and declared him guilty. On June 9 of that year, the court in the city of Salvador sentenced him to 23 years and 5 months in prison, which he had to serve in the Limos Brito Penitentiary. Despite the sentence, prosecutor Cleo Cibola said that, for her, the case was not over, as she believed there were more people involved. Pastor Silvio's lawyers appealed the sentence issued in the first instance. In a first appeal, they managed to have the sentence reduced to 18 years in prison. In the next appeal, they lowered it to 15 years. 2 years later, in 2006, the now former Pastor Silvio, accompanied by 7 lawyers, presented a new version of the events. On that occasion, he accused 3 other members of the church, Bishop Fernando Silva, Pastor Joel Miranda Machado, and his security manager Luis Clau. According to Silvio's new testimony, Lucas was murdered because he had told him that he saw Pastor Joel and Bishop Fernando having sexual relations. When this detail was revealed, it exposed the movements that the church made to hide such acts. When their pastors committed these types of acts, they were not expelled but rather transferred to other cities. In Fernando's case, in 2001, he worked in the Temple of Pituba, and after the crime, he led a church in Minas Gerais. Joel was the pastor of the Universal Church in Rio Vermelho, and after the homicide, he moved to Rio de Janeiro, where he ran a church. The statement was accepted by the prosecution. However, the legal representative of the new defendants claimed that Silvio's accusations were motivated by revenge, stating that Silvio was acting in retaliation since he had been expelled from the temple for inappropriate conduct against Lucas. In response to the lawyer's accusations, Silvio gave an interview while serving his sentence, stating that he had been subjected to strong psychological pressure, received death threats from a lawyer associated with the church, and was blackmailed to admit the facts of the crime. In October 2007, the Superior Court of Justice ordered that the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God must compensate Lucas's family with 1 million reais, around $24,000, for moral damages. The court established that the execution of the atrocious crime was only possible due to an attitude of cover-up by the religious institution. This negligence was not only due to the poor choice of its preaching members, in the case of Silvio, but also because there was no surveillance over him. The decision was challenged by the defense of the church, alleging that Silvio was not working at the time the homicide occurred. However, the court held that Silvio had asked Lucas to stay longer in the temple, which belonged to the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God, and therefore the decision was maintained in favor of Lucas Terra's family. In February 2008, a case was opened against Bishop Fernando, who was detained in prison after being on the run for a time. A few months later, he was released on bail while awaiting his legal process. Pastor Joel remained on the run. In December of that same year, the church had to pay the family's compensation with interest, which amounted to approximately $47,000 that same month. After 4 years and 6 months of pressure, Silvio's lawyers managed to get him granted the benefit of the semi-open regime. In August 2009, Fernando and Joel received a habeas corpus granted by the First Chamber of the Supreme Federal Court. The case made headlines in the country's main newspapers, and a documentary was released that portrayed the crime, written and directed by Claudio Factum. Lucas's father dedicated all his financial resources and days of his life to ensure justice was served. He knew that a conviction would not change the cruel fate imposed on his son, but he believed it could offer some consolation to his memory if he could see the conviction of his murderers. The man and his family suffered death threats, but nothing was as strong as the pain of losing his son in such a cruel way and at the hands of supposed servants of God. The successive defeats in the courts disillusioned Jose Carlos and Marian. Jose Carlos even began a law course at a higher education institute in Salvador to better understand the procedures and bureaucracies of trials. However, he ended up disappointed and dropped out in his last semester when he realized the loopholes in Brazil's laws. In July 2012, after serving 7 years in a closed regime, a new judicial decision granted Silvio conditional freedom. The cavalry of José Carlos and Marian continued for many more years. The trial against Bishop Fernando and Pastor Joel suffered all possible delays. In 2013, Judge Almeida acquitted the pastors due to lack of evidence, and Lucas's family appealed the decision. In an interview, José Carlos pointed out that after almost 12 years had passed since his son's death, only one of those responsible for the crime had been convicted while the other two were free. In September 2015, the judges of the Court of Justice decided unanimously to send the religious figures to a popular jury, and the decision was confirmed by the Superior Court of Justice. However, the defense of the two accused appealed the court's decision, which was annulled in November 2018 by Minister Ricardo Lewandowski of the Supreme Federal Court, alleging a lack of evidence. In response, the Attorney General's office appealed the decision. Lucas's father continued his campaign to request a trial against the pastors with a popular jury, but an obstacle arose that exceeded legal challenges. José Carlos passed away on February 21, 2019. He was admitted to a hospital in Palo with kidney failure and died of respiratory arrest. He was buried in the cemetery in the Nova Brasilia neighborhood in Salvador, alongside his son Lucas. His wife, Marian, noted that José Carlos was tired after so much time fighting for justice and believed that they had managed to silence his voice. She vowed to continue the fight until the guilty were punished, seeking even the slightest sense of justice. A second book in the Lucas terror saga, Betrayed by Obedience, was published, with the first part released in 2016. The book was written by Lucas's parents and independently distributed. On May 1, 2019, the digital version was released on Amazon. In 2020, the Second Chamber of the Supreme Federal Court decided that the two accused pastors should go to a popular jury. Their defense claimed they were innocent and that there was no evidence against them. However, one of the lawyers for Lucas's family, Ricardo Sampaio, said that the prosecution had enough evidence to prove not only their involvement in Lucas's death but also that they had committed statutory rape. After several delays, the trial finally began on April 25, 2023, in the Forum Roy Barbosa in Salvador. Both pastors were accused of triple qualified homicide and concealment of a corpse, with 3 aggravating factors: use of cruel means, the inability of the victim to defend himself, and the motive of passion. The Universal Church of the Kingdom of God established its position, pointing out that both religious figures were innocent and hired lawyers Nestor Fernandez Tavoro and Nelson D. Costa Bru to represent them. The jury was composed of 5 men and 2 women, and Judge Andrea Tira Lima Centonado was assigned to lead the debate. During the sessions, statements were heard from 15 witnesses, 5 on behalf of the prosecution and 10 for the defense. Prosecutors Ariamar José Fido de Silva and David Gallo called several of Lucas's friends to the stand, who testified that Pastor Fernando had prohibited church workers from participating in the search for the adolescent even before confirmation of his death. They indicated that Lucas's girlfriend had been expelled from the temple and received threats. They also revealed that another pastor, Baal Yardusa Santos, adopted a threatening tone to discourage initiatives to search for Lucas. The religious man Jair was the first witness called by the defense, but he ended up contradicting himself in his statements. In his testimony before the jury, he stated that at that time he was living in Julio Cesar Park with Pastor Joel. However, the prosecution recalled that in a previous statement, he said that he resided in a condominium on Parallel Avenue with only his wife. Another contradiction pointed out by the public ministry had to do with the relationship between Jair and the accused. In a statement given in 2008, the witness stated that he knew the pastors only by sight, but on the stand, he declared that he lived with Joel. On the last day of the debate, the 2 accused gave their testimony. The first to take the stand was Joel, who declared himself innocent and stated that he did not know Lucas before his disappearance was reported. He assured that he had no relationship or friendship with the 2 accused and that he was not homosexual. Fernando admitted knowing the teenager but denied his participation in the crime. During his intervention, he answered the judge's questions and assured that he had given Lucas the same treatment he had with other members of the church. He also stated that Lucas's father had looked for him when he noticed that his son had not arrived home, and he had given him all the information he had. The wives of the 2 religious men also took the stand and declared that they were with their husbands on the day Lucas disappeared. The defense asserted that their clients were innocent and that Lucas's murder was committed solely by Pastor Silvio, who had already been convicted. They did not deny the existence of a barbaric crime but insisted that their clients were innocent and asked the judges not to confuse the certainty of the crime with the certainty of who committed it. For their part, the representative of the prosecution assured in his final arguments that both defendants were monsters who had taken the life of an innocent angel and deserved the full punishment of the law. Before the sentence was handed down, Lucas's mother, Marian, offered statements to the press. She said that she hoped justice would finally be served to end their 22-year-long cycle of grief. She warned that the fight had been difficult after so many years but was counting the days and hours to hear the court's decision, which she hoped would be fair. She also regretted that Pastor Belayer of the Universal Church of Pituba would not appear in the process as one of the accused since he had also helped the murderers cover up the crime. The mother recalled that Joel and Belayer were together when the murder occurred and pointed out that, according to the reconstruction of events by the police chief, it was shown that the cloth used to gag and tie their son came from the church curtain. Finally, on April 27, by the decision of the majority of the jury, the two pastors were sentenced to 21 years in prison for the murder of Lucas. According to Judge Andrea Law, the base sentence for homicide was 18 years, with an additional 3 years due to the victim's inability to defend himself. Both would serve their sentences under a closed regime, but they did not go to jail immediately. Both Fernando and Joel could appeal the decision while remaining free because they appeared without resistance to the trial. The charge of hiding a corpse was excluded because it expired for years after the fact. Once the judge finished giving her statements and after the announcement of the sentence, the popular jury was dismissed, while the voices of Lucas's relatives could be heard shouting at the convicted pastors. The victim's mother declared that she was very happy with the decision, which she described as a victory not only for her but for her entire family, especially her late husband, who fought tirelessly to obtain justice. She said she had lived through an ordeal waiting for justice, which arrived late after 22 years of impunity. She thanked the media for their support as well as the entire community of Salvador de Bahia for accompanying them during all those years. The fact that Joel and Fernando were not in prison while the appeals were being made generated a lot of discontent. The media turned to experts to explain what happened and to reduce the public's frustration. One of those legal experts, Pablo Dominguez, explained that the accused could wait for the appeal in freedom since there was no final and firm sentence, and the Bahia Court of Justice understood that there were no reasons to demand their immediate arrest. Dominguez pointed out that, according to the Brazilian constitution, no one loses their status as innocent due to a conviction until it is confirmed by higher courts. Therefore, Joel and Fernando retained their status as innocent until all resources were exhausted. The murder of Lucas was the subject of several books and documentaries in the years following his death was classified as one of the most heinous and gruesome crimes in Brazil. To this day, people are still waiting for all the appeals in higher instances to determine whether these two pastors will remain in jail. Boys and girls, that's it for today's video. A very sad case. As we always say, it's reprehensible when such a young life is lost. Lucas was a boy who was simply following his religion, doing what he believed was good, and his parents thought the church was a safe place for him to spend time. It is very sad what happened to Lucas, and there are still many unanswered questions. We are still waiting for all the necessary appeals, but in the end, for the murder of Lucas, there are 3 convicted. This story has many hypotheses, nuances, and versions from each person involved. What is clear is that the people who were supposed to care for this teenager failed him. They did horrible things to him, and ultimately, the guilty have been sentenced. Although Lucas's father could not see justice, we believe that wherever he is, he knows what happened in this case. If you found this video informative, remember to leave a like. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in another case. Goodbye. On September 30th, 2023, during the Mid-Autumn Festival, a horrific car crash shocked Washington state. At 4:30 a.m. police found a white Porsche 911 overturned at the intersection of 108th Avenue and State Route 520. The accident left a 27-year-old male passenger dead and a 26-year-old female driver critically injured. Both were young professionals with promising careers. The twist: before the local court could issue an arrest warrant, the injured driver vanished. allegedly fleeing back to China. Rumors of deceit and a well-planned escape have since swirled, turning a tragic accident into a gripping mystery. Join us in unraveling the story behind this case. Hello, and welcome to the Crime Documentary Files channel. On the road, there are long skid marks, and the thick cement barriers on the roadside have been forcefully broken. Following the marks, in the distance on the greenbelt, a white Porsche 911 is flipped over, its body severely deformed, the roof flattened, and white smoke coming from underneath, indicating a potential explosion. Rescuers found a female driver and a male passenger inside the car. The male passenger was pronounced dead at the scene, while the injured female driver was rushed to the hospital. Authorities have stated that alcohol played a significant role in this tragic incident, with preliminary evidence suggesting impaired judgment on the driver's part as a critical factor in the fatal accident. The two people involved in the accident are both Chinese nationals. They were not only in their prime of youth but also had very promising career prospects. The deceased, a 27-year-old male, was an engineer at TikTok, while the 26-year-old female driver was a programmer at Apple. Both drunk driving and speeding led to one losing their life on the spot and the other's future left uncertain. This was not a complex or bizarre criminal case, as the police have determined, and the young driver will pay a heavy price for her mistake. This tragic event serves as a heartbreaking reminder for everyone to drive carefully, avoid speeding, and never drink and drive. However, the story did not end there. Before the local court issued an arrest warrant, the injured female driver mysteriously disappeared. Subsequently, many Chinese individuals revealed on social media that the culpable female driver, fearing imprisonment, had swiftly fled back to China. Not only that, a person claiming to be a friend of the deceased disclosed that, after the incident, the female driver went to great lengths to conceal her boyfriend's death, lying to those who knew them, falsely claiming that her boyfriend was fine, while exchanging a large amount of currency in WeChat groups to prepare for fleeing the country. Even more shocking was her refusal to reveal any information about the deceased to the authorities, leading the police to confirm the identity of the deceased through other channels, causing the parents of the deceased to only find out about their son's death later. The content of these revelations has made this car accident the recent hot topic of discussion in the North American Chinese community, sparking significant attention and condemnation. Apart from the severe consequences of the accident itself and the female driver allegedly fleeing the scene, this female driver is said to be an online influencer, young, beautiful, with a good job, and known for flaunting her wealth on social media. These factors have all contributed to the massive attention drawn to the accident. Based on the information we currently have, we will go through the causes and development of the accident. The footage of the accident in this video comes from American media, court documents, and police recordings, while all other information was sourced from the internet. Fan tips, analysis, and comments were only based on the information currently available. If anyone has more reliable information, feel free to fill us in via the comment section. Using the Accident Responsibility Identification document signed by the police on October 5th, let's reconstruct the process of the accident. First, on the morning of September 30th, which was a Saturday, around 3:44 a.m., a tragic accident occurred as the culprit vehicle was heading from Bellevue downtown in the state of Washington towards State Route 520. Yetting, aged 26, was driving a white 2020 Porsche 911 with the passenger, later identified as 27-year-old Liu Yeba, roaring at over 90 miles per hour, which is close to 145 kilometers per hour. They were speeding on 108th Avenue, lost control at the intersection merging onto State Route 520, crashed into a concrete barrier at high speed, charged into the air, flipped multiple times, flew over a reservoir, hit the side of a bridge, and ended up upside down in a planter next to State Route 520. Upon arriving at the scene, the police officers and firefighters realized the extensive damage to the vehicle. They found that the driver's side door was the only exit that could rescue the two people inside. They first rescued the driver, Yetting, then they cut through Liu Yeba's seatbelt inside the car and dragged him out from the passenger seat with great difficulty. Medical personnel confirmed that Liu Yeba had unfortunately passed away at the scene. While attending to Yetting's injuries, a firefighter named Andrew detected a strong smell of alcohol on her breath, a fact later confirmed by paramedic SA. Subsequently, Yetting was transported to the Harborview Medical Center in an ambulance. The police promptly applied for a search warrant to obtain Yetting's blood alcohol content report. Bellevue traffic cameras also captured the moment when Yetting's car was involved in the accident, as well as the driving conditions of the vehicle at the intersection of 112th Avenue and 24th Street before entering the accident section. The officer from the Washington Police Department wrote, based on the video footage, that at 112th Avenue and 24th Street, Yetting's car was already traveling at 92 miles per hour. At 108th Avenue, the speed increased to 94 miles per hour. After losing control, the car swerved sideways, with the driver's side heading forwards. The car hit the concrete barrier at a speed of at least 91 miles per hour, equivalent to 146 kilometers per hour, leaving clear skid marks at the scene. These marks were initially on the southbound lane, even though Yetting was driving north at the time. The officer on that side also indicated that the road was dry at the time of the incident, and Yetting's car did not collide with any object before hitting the barrier, so weather factors or road conditions influencing the accident were basically ruled out. We also checked that on 112th Avenue or 108th Avenue, the speed limits are both 30 miles per hour, which is 48 kilometers per hour. This means that at the time of the accident, Yetting's speed was more than 3 times the local speed limit. Into a wall at such a high speed, and the driver survived, it can only be described as quite lucky. Some netizens also discussed the safety functionality of Porsches, but that is not related to our topic today. The conclusion reached in this accident report is that there was sufficient evidence to suggest that Yetting was suspected of violating Chapter 42, Section 61.5-4 of the Washington State Revised Code, the offense of vehicular homicide. According to this statute, vehicular homicide is divided into 3 scenarios. Firstly, unintentional actions resulting in someone's death. This means when a person, while driving a motor vehicle, causes the death of another person due to negligence in violating traffic rules or other laws. Secondly, driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs resulting in someone's death. Thirdly, reckless driving or disregarding the safety of others. Having reviewed the 3 scenarios above, it seems that any one of them could be used to describe the behavior of Yetting. According to the police accident report, the prosecutor's office in Seattle has applied for the arrest of Yetting in the Washington State Superior Court for vehicular homicide. The prosecutor outlined several points in the case summary, stating that, due to the defendant's injuries, the police were unable to question her at the scene. However, 3 hours after the accident, a search warrant was approved for the defendant's blood alcohol content test. The forensic scientist has obtained the results related to the blood sample and is awaiting testing by an independent office. Second, Mr. Liu was seriously injured and pronounced dead at the scene. His body was taken to the King County Medical Examiner's office. The defendant refused to provide any information about Mr. Liu to the authorities. Investigators had to inform his immediate family about his death through his workplace in Seattle. Third, the defendant obtained a driver's license on February 12, 2021, with no prior history of traffic or criminal offenses before this incident. The car she was driving was a 2020 Porsche 911, valued between $97,000 and $133,000. Fourth, both the defendant and Mr. Liu are Chinese nationals living in Seattle. It is unclear how long the defendant intended to stay in Seattle for work. She resided in a single-bedroom apartment. Washington State does not have an extradition treaty with China, and the defendant had no connections to the local community. Given the above points, the prosecutor requested that the bail amount for Yetting be set at $2 million, along with several conditions, including surrendering her passport, not driving, and not leaving the state of Washington without court permission. If the defendant is unable to pay the bail, home confinement is required, with the wearing of an electronic ankle monitor and alcohol level monitoring. The prosecution's request was approved by the Superior Court on October 9, where the judge issued an arrest warrant and set the bail amount at $2 million, with detention if bail is not paid pending trial. When Washington, D.C. police arrived at the hospital where Yetting was, they found out that she had already been discharged, and her whereabouts were unknown shortly after. Rumors started circulating on social media that a female programmer from Seattle was responsible for her boyfriend's death in a drunk driving accident and had quietly fled back to her home country, sparking much attention. It turns out that Yetting was a small influencer and had built a following of thousands of followers on various social platforms due to her attractive appearance, prestigious educational background, being a postgraduate student, and her job as a data engineer at Apple. This act of fleeing after the incident created a stark contrast with her online image and professional identity. Some other self-proclaimed friends of Liu have come forward one after another, claiming that Yetting was extremely selfish. Not only did she refuse to disclose the identity of the young man to the police, but she also kept the news of his passing from the young man's family and friends, causing the parents and friends of the victimized boyfriend to learn of the bad news 2 weeks later. What's even more unsettling to netizens was that someone discovered that, after the incident, she was still updating her social media accounts, sipping afternoon tea at home and enjoying life, creating an illusion of tranquility all while secretly preparing to exchange US dollars for Chinese RMB in WeChat group chats to return to China. After successfully escaping, she then deleted all her social media pages in an attempt to evade responsibility by disappearing. These series of actions have fueled public outrage to its peak. However, at this moment, on the YouTube platform, a large number of users of Indian descent suddenly appeared, claiming that Yetting's rescue efforts in the hospital were unsuccessful and that she became the second fatality in this accident. With twists and turns of plot with 9 bends and 18 turns, everyone was left at a loss, not knowing who was telling the truth and who was lying. Has Yetting truly fled back to her country, or has she passed away in the hospital at this point in the story? Let's untangle the timeline. First, the car accident was reported to have happened on September 30th, and the arrest warrant was issued on October 9th. If it is true that Yetting managed to escape, then it means that within just 8 days after the accident, she was able to book a flight with her injuries, arrange everything, and endure a flight of over 10 hours back to her country. Is it really possible? In fact, the arrest warrant for Yetting was only entered into the system on October 9th. Therefore, from a technical point of view, she could have left the United States without being stopped at the border. But, considering her physical condition, would her injuries allow her to leave the U.S.? Especially after watching the video of Yetting being questioned by Detective Negrin in the hospital on October 2nd, it's hard for people to believe that she really managed to escape back to her home country, because, no matter how you look at her condition in the video, it didn't seem like she was in a state to get up and run away. On that day, Detective Negrin and his colleagues arrived at Harborview Medical Center, where Yetting was located, for the first round of questioning. Following the police recording, we can deduce more information about the case. Seeing Yetting in the emergency ward, out of respect for the individual's privacy, we have made some edits to the video. Nevertheless, you can see that she was quite injured. Her right arm is heavily bandaged from the armpit to the wrist. She was wearing a neck brace and had a breathing tube in her nose. With her voice being weak and patchy, the only thing that can be confirmed is that she seemed conscious enough. Here is the conversation between Yetting and the detective. The detective first identified himself and stated the purpose of his visit. At this point, she requested a male friend to come to her bedside to offer support. The man who was originally beside Yetting moved out of the camera's view after the arrival of the police. At Yetting's request, the police agreed to let this male friend of Yetting's remain by the hospital bed. The exact nature of their relationship is not the focus of this discussion, but it is evident that Yetting was very nervous about the upcoming questioning by the police inspector. Detective Negrin then explained that this video footage was TPM and read out the Miranda warning to Yetting according to procedures. So today is October 2nd, 2023, and it's about 2:02 p.m. This is Detective Negrin with the City of Beat Police Department. This interview is regarding case number 2023-53397. I am interviewing Tingli. T. Can you spell your name for me, please? My name is. Are you able to spell that for me? Rtingye, she replied. When Detective Negrin informed Yetting of her rights and asked if she voluntarily wanted to answer some questions, she said, regarding today's visit, can I have a lawyer answer the questions on my behalf? The subsequent conversation mainly revolved around how to engage a lawyer. The police informed Yiding that she could either find a lawyer online to represent her or request a public defender to defend her. The inquiry ended around 10 in the afternoon that day, and the police were unable to ask her any questions related to the accident from start to finish because, after Yiding finished listening to Miranda's warning from the police, she requested to have a lawyer answer all the questions on her behalf. Seeing this, we can clearly see that Yiding was very clear-headed at the time, but the injuries did not seem like she would be discharged in a short period of time. So, it is still a question whether she has fled back to the country, because all along we have only seen the online disclosure from Chinese and Indian netizens but have never received an official announcement from the police. On October 27th, all the questions were finally answered. BLLW police confirmed that Yiding had escaped back to China, and they have initiated an international search. The public information officer in Washington state clarified some details in an interview with a local TV station. Firstly, the car accident occurred around 3:45 in the morning, and it took 45 minutes for passersby to report the accident. Secondly, based on the police's calculation of the skid marks at the scene, the vehicle was traveling at a speed of over 100 miles per hour before the accident, which is over 160 kilometers per hour. Most importantly, someone drove Yiding from the scene, Seattle to Vancouver, Canada, and then Yiding took a flight back to China from Vancouver. As for the identity of this person, the police are still investigating, but it is certain that whoever it is will face serious legal consequences. Previously, someone questioned the reason for the late warrant issued by the police. Why was there no one guarding the hospital, and how could a patient with injuries manage to escape? Seth, the public information officer, also answered these questions one by one during the interview. Firstly, issuing an arrest warrant requires a certain process, and it's not solely up to the police. As mentioned earlier, it requires the police to produce an accident responsibility identification report, which the prosecution then uses to apply to the court. Only if the court agrees with the prosecution's suggestion is the arrest warrant issued. It needs to be done step by step. Secondly, Yiding has been refusing to cooperate with the investigators and insisted on having a lawyer present to answer all questions on her behalf. Therefore, the police could only collect sufficient information unilaterally to be able to produce the accident report. By the time the identification report was issued and the court issued the arrest warrant, they found out that Yiding had already left the hospital. When Yiding was discharged, the hospital did not inform the police because the arrest warrant was not in place at that time. So the final question is, why didn't the police send someone to keep an eye on her? That's because they never thought that she could run away in such a condition, as Seth said, due to Yiding's injuries. We simply did not believe she could be discharged from the hospital in a short time, so at that time we did not think it was necessary to assign an officer to her. The police's explanation makes sense, after all. Who could have imagined that a woman who had just been in a serious car accident one moment with a breathing tube inserted, wrapped in bandages, and with a neck brace the next moment would pack up, cross the US-Canada border by car, then take a flight back to China in just over 10 hours? What about the PTSD? The PTSD from a car accident typically needs a long healing process, but it seemed like a non-issue to Ms. Yiding. I wonder if Yiding's escape has left a psychological shadow on the Washington police. If they will be more cautious if they encounter another female suspect of Chinese nationality in the future, regardless of the severity of the injuries. Since Yiding is willing to carry such a serious injury back to her country, it shows that she was very clear about the possible penalties she may face in the United States and that the same charge may result in a much lighter sentence in China. According to our research, in Washington state, vehicular homicide is a class of felony, and individuals with no criminal record could face a standard sentence of 6.5 to 8.5 years in prison plus a fine of $50,000. In China, causing death by drunk driving constitutes a traffic accident crime and could result in a sentence of less than 3 years of fixed-term imprisonment. Some people speculated that Yiding must have received guidance from someone with knowledge and experience in this area, which is why she decided to return to China in a short period of time. Others even claimed that Yiding's father is a Chinese prosecutor, though we cannot verify the authenticity of this information. In fact, even without any guidance from an authority figure, One can easily find information online regarding the sentencing standards for vehicular homicide in Washington state. This information is typically soft sell advertising written by criminal lawyers in Washington state. Lawyers usually also mention that, typically, the government does not immediately bring forth these charges after the incident, as the police and prosecutors investigate and wait to collect all relevant evidence and toxicology reports. In some jurisdictions, vehicular homicide charges may take several months to be brought to court. Therefore, it is advised for everyone to use this time wisely. In fact, the lawyer's intention is for the defendants to quickly hire them as representatives during this time. However, it is not known if this statement inspired Yiding, who was searching for a representative lawyer online at the time. Ultimately, the final outcome was that she successfully escaped back to China by taking advantage of the time gaps. Besides who brought her to Canada and who her father is, many netizens are more concerned about Yiding, who managed to escape back to China. Did she really escape without consequences? Will she still have to face repercussions for her actions? Regarding this matter, Public Information Officer Seth stated, "We would like to inform Miss Y that she is wanted for vehicular homicide, and we need her to come back and talk to us so the families of the victims can continue with their lives. While China and the United States do not have an extradition agreement, she should be aware that if she attempts to go to any of the countries that do, she will be immediately arrested." Does this mean that Yiding's only punishment is that she can no longer travel to countries with extradition agreements with the United States for the rest of her life? Regarding this matter, netizens have several views. First, when Yiding returned to China, was it considered fleeing before the U.S. authorities issued an arrest warrant? If I didn't know you were going to arrest me and there was no prior prohibition on me leaving the country, can't I return to my country for medical purposes? The second point is that there is no extradition agreement between China and the U.S. The focus of judicial cooperation between the two countries is on exchanging information and conducting joint investigations on cases of corruption and fraud. In reality, the U.S. may not be very interested in going after Yiding and spending resources on it. Thirdly, Yiding did not flee from the scene of the accident, and the traffic accident did not occur in China, so she will not face legal sanctions in China. With all these points, will Yiding really not face any repercussions after returning to her country? This story emphasizes the importance of driving responsibly, adhering to speed limits, and never driving under the influence of alcohol. It also underscores the necessity of accountability and integrity in the aftermath of such tragedies. We must all remember that our actions can have far-reaching impacts on the lives of others and that taking responsibility for our mistakes is crucial. Let this be a lesson to always prioritize safety and consider the potential consequences of our actions on ourselves and others. Thank you for watching the video. See you next time.